Good afternoon. Thank you for being here. My name is Sue Morton. I'm with PFLAG Marshall Buffalo Ridge. And if you're not familiar with PFLAG and that is new to you, PFLAG is an organization that mentors and educates, stands for Parents and Friends of Gays and Lesbians, and let's add everybody in, Two-Spirit plus trans, bi. We are here, we have been in this country for since 1972. So we're not an old organization, we're a new organization. And we are here for you in Marshall. If you are interested, we're on Facebook and Instagram, and we are now on TikTok. So greet us there and keep in touch with our events. I would like to start this day by welcoming everybody and have you turn to the person next to you, behind you, beside you, and say thank you for having the courage to stand up and fight. And give them a handshake. So I would also like to thank P-Fund Minnesota for giving us a grant that allows us to have this special event. We're really excited about it. We have a second session tonight at the YMCA from 6 to 8 p.m. So if you are, well, hi, Al. Hey. If you know someone that isn't here today and you think they might need to be there at night, give them a call when you get home and invite them to go at night. We appreciate that. Also want to thank our committee members, Mr. Darwin Dice. He is a PFLAG dad, and our great leader of the Marshall Area Peace Seekers. I'd like to thank Julie Walker, director of the SMSU LGBTQ Plus Center. I would like to thank Beth Collins, PFLAG, James Lord, PFLAG, and I would like to thank Kat Rohn. She isn't here today. She is the director of Outfront Minnesota, but she has also been on that committee, and we've done a lot of back and forth to get this organized, and I really appreciate that. Long distance planning can sometimes be difficult, and she made it go very, very easily. Our sponsors today are Outfront Minnesota, Marshall Pride, the MORE Network, SMSU LGBTQ Plus Center, and let's see if I didn't leave anybody out. I want to make sure I get everybody. Oh, on the Marshall Area Peace Seekers. That's an interesting group. If you're not familiar with that, we stand on corners with signs in our hands, and most of us were, born in 1940s, so we went through the 60s really well. So, with that said, I would like to introduce Dr. Erin Klein, and she is your Diversity Inclusion Officer here at SMSU. Erin?
Good afternoon, everyone. I had plans to say more things, but I'm struggling to speak today, which is unusual for me. But thank you all for being here. It's exciting to see a commitment and time spent to learn more, to listen, to seek to understand. So I'm really grateful to all of you and the effort that brought you all here. Ultimately, as Dr. Martin Luther King likes to remind us, the time is always right to do what is right. And at present, it's more important than ever to be willing to learn, to be willing to listen, and to support healing. We won't always get it right, but if we are willing to acknowledge our blind spots and to see our shared humanity, we will be that much closer at creating lasting change. So again, I'm grateful to everybody who the effort and time and commitment took to plan this event. I was called in to announce I can't take any credit for any of this work yet. So I'm just really grateful to this opportunity. So thank you all for being here. Have a wonderful day, and I'm excited to see this happen. Take care.
Before we get started, we do have a special guest here today that I would like to introduce, Jeannie Poppy. If you would raise your hand over there. Jeannie is our Southwest Outreach person with the office of Senator Tina Smith. So thank you for being here. Thank you to Tina for recognizing the importance of this event. We appreciate it. So we are here today to discuss the great division of thought that has led our society to embrace hatred. Hatred especially towards our marginalized communities. Today we shall talk the talk, and it will be beginning of our walk to take action and make change. And you are here to make a difference. Thank you for being here. Little housekeeping, you have an agenda to take a peek at on your chair, and you have an index card. So our format today is that we will have a keynote speaker, followed by a very short break, followed by a panel discussion with questions and answers. So if you have any questions, write them down in your index card, place them in the basket over on the small table, and we will try and address those questions during our panel discussion. If you don't have a pen, there are pens on the table. With that said, I would like to welcome Darwin Dice, who will proceed with our land acknowledgement statement and introduce our keynote speaker.
All right. As we begin, we acknowledge that this land we stand upon today is sacred and significant to the Dakota people. We also acknowledge that they truly cared for this land many generations before European colonialism tried to systematically erase their way of living. As we recognize our shared history, may we work to build healthy relationships with sovereign indigenous nations and commit to building a diverse and inclusive environment with respect, understanding, and appreciation for all. That also means we do not ignore the history of enslaving people of color upon whose backs this nation was built. So, as we get into the introduction here, I feel like we've asked the participants here in this timely discussion to squeeze into 2 hours what could well be a 2-day kind of event. So thanks Matt, Leo, Julie, Joyce, Jose, and Hannah for taking this on. Please understand that addressing this important topic begins with awareness, which Matt's presentation and our panelists are tasked with. That awareness set the stage for much needed dialogue that I hope can take place in our homes, communities, and nation for that matter. As organizers, it's our hope that our community, however you define it, can develop greater empathy, curiosity, and joy as antidotes to fear, judgment, and distrust. With that said, we begin the presentation part. Please give a listen to Matt Llewellyn-Otten, Associate Director of Rural Organizing for Outfront, Minnesota. Thank you, Matt, for coming to this important event.
Thank you. I think I'm mic'd up. I should be okay. Yeah. It's my Britney Spears moment here, which I'm very excited about. Hi, everybody. It's good to see all of you, and thank you so much for being here today and for taking a moment to think about the ways that we can begin to think about dismantling hate. It's quite a big task that we have, and I hope that the little bit of knowledge that I have will help all of you to think more deeply, reflect deeply about the ways that you can be a change maker for your community. So I have a good bit of material here. I'll do a little bit of an introduction about myself. But since we are a LGBTQIA2S plus organization, I'm also going to give you a little bit of a 101 of what all those letters mean. So first we have our group expectations, and thank you so much, Julie, for doing our PowerPoint. I really appreciate it. First, we want to be confidential about what we're learning. Maybe somebody will share something if we're having a moment to reflect, or if people are sharing their stories. We want to leave with the core lessons, right? Narratives help us get to core lessons, which is really helpful. So we want to leave here with what we learned, but we want to leave, wait, hold on. Yes, the stories want to stay here, but the narrative leaves. No, that's not what I'm saying. The narrative stays here, but the lessons leave with us, right? I have a more quippy way of saying that, but it's not coming to my brain right now, so that's okay. But so we want to practice confidentiality. We want to use I statements instead of blanket statements for everybody, right? I feel confused about pronouns versus pronouns are hard, nobody gets them, right? We want to stick with where we're coming from using those I statements. There might be questions that you have too, things that you are ruminating over, things that you're learning maybe for the very first time, and that's okay. I want you to be a little bit uncomfortable with new learnings, right? Things that you're still grasping with. Try to settle with non-closure. Try to settle in that and follow those curiosities. And questions might come up. We have a great panel of people. You'll have an opportunity to jot down your questions. Please leave your questions for there, unless it's just like a super burning question, or if I'm talking too quickly or too slowly or not loud enough, please. If I'm not talking loud enough, go like this. And if I'm talking too fast, go like this. Okay, so let's practice. Speak up, Matt. Slow down, Matt. Okay, great. Thank you. I appreciate it. So we want to make sure that I'm speaking clearly, slowly, and that I'm not just going off, because how many presentations of this have I done? A lot. Let's go to the next slide. So one of the things that we like to talk about is this idea of intent versus impact, especially when we're talking about community care, dismantling hate. People may say that they aren't homophobic, transphobic, racist, ableist, but what they typically mean is that they don't intend to be any of those things. Our intent is less important than the impact of our actions, if our actions still harm somebody. Our intent is less important than the impact of our actions if our actions perpetuate harmful, hateful ideas and systems. So when we're talking about intent versus impact, we want to be able to take a beat, take a pause, think about our intent, how we're communicating our intent, and the impact that our words might have on people. Let's go to the next slide. Beautiful. This is me. I'm here in front of you too. I'm a former youth minister. It's who I am. I did youth ministry for 15 years. I give off youth minister vibes. I know it. I embrace it. It's who I am. I did it for 15 years. It's fine. I grew up in Charleston, South Carolina, so I still love sweet tea. I say y'all. And I'm trying to get out of saying yes, ma'am, and yes, sir, right? I'm trying to get out of that, too. Lover of coffee and candy, and I am a firm believer in the Oxford comma. We need the Oxford comma. It's so important. And a little bit about my work is, as the religious organizer, I get to work with spiritual communities all across the state in thinking about the ways that they welcome and affirm LGBTQ plus people, the ways that they are able to celebrate queer people in their communities, the ways that they're able to open their doors even wider to people. And also I work thinking about the ways that white supremacy has made its way into religious circles and into our communities. And so that's a part of my work as well. So, yeah. And my favorite quote right now: fish live in streams, birds nest in trees, human beings dwell in warm hearts. Something that I like to remind myself, that at our core is our heart. We dwell in the heart. Let's go to the next slide. Out from Minnesota's mission. I have to read this. I'm sorry. This is a newer statement. I had our old one down, and as soon as we had our mission statement down, we changed it. So, Outfront's Minnesota's mission is to build power within Minnesota's 2S LGBTQIA+ communities and address inequities through intersectional organizing, advocacy, education, direct support services. And then we envision a safe and equitable world where all members of our communities are free to lead lives of opportunity, autonomy, and full self-expression. Cute. It's cute. Like, mission and vision statements are cute, right? They're beautiful, sentimental words, but like, what does this mean? So first, we have our policy and organizing department, the most important organization or team. Oh, sorry, forgot my colleagues were here too. I'm in policy and organizing. In policy and organizing, we work with legislators, we work with the communities to give voice to the things that people really care about. Right? So we are in a couple of different coalitions of people working with legislators and communities. I'll go through those in a little bit. We have our Education Equity Department. Aaliyah is our Director of Education Equity, and Aaliyah is an amazing human being who leads the work in working with school districts, school boards, working with staff and faculty, and even students to think about the ways that schools can be affirming and welcoming places for all students. They do amazing work, and as we know, there's a lot of stuff happening with our school boards across the state, and Aaliyah is right in the thick of that. So thank you, Aaliyah, for your work. We also have an anti-violence program, which has an 800 number that people can call. If you could go to the next slide for me, Julie. If you're in a crisis or if you're the victim of some type of crime, especially in your home or violence, if you're feeling unsafe somewhere, we have a resource line. This 800-800-0350 number is there for you. You can speak with somebody and somebody can get you connected to the resources that you need in order to thrive. And then, what's our last? Oh, we have a training coordinator. Sorry, we have a training manager who does trainings throughout the state too. Hannah is our training manager, so thank you, Hannah. Hannah works a lot with corporations, organizations all across the state and helping them to think about how they welcome queer people too. Next slide. So this is a list of a few of the communities that we are connected with and that we are in coalition with. So we actually have a collection. I want to first say that we have a collection of congregations, almost 200 congregations across our state who are welcome and affirming, and that number is growing. And I keep going into these churches and synagogues and temples and helping people to think about the way that they welcome queer congregants. We also are part of trans refuge networks, people who might be seeking care within our state where they can't get care in their own home state. I do a lot of work around religious organizing. I'm also part of a HIV at-home test kit distribution. And what we do, it's as easy as a COVID test now to get tested for HIV. It is considered an epidemic, again, here in the state of Minnesota, because people are not accessing the resources that they need and want, and they don't know how. And so we're able to distribute these at-home HIV test kits. You take a little swab of your gums, and you put it in a little tester, and it tells you, and then we give you connected to resources, should you test positive or negative, to prevent the spread of HIV. We are part of a community combating hate coalition. I'll give you some more resources and a link so you can check out their work a little bit later in this presentation. And then a big part of my work is also Bring It Home Minnesota, which is part of a housing voucher program is what we're trying to get passed in the legislature. Queer people need housing too. Queer people need housing and resources as well. That's important to remember, that queer people, especially trans and non-binary and queer youth, experience homelessness as well. Let's go to our next slide. We'll talk a little bit about terms and definitions here. I meant to give myself a timer. What time should I wrap up by, Darwin? At 2? Okay, great. So I have 35 minutes. I'm going to time myself for 30. Okay. So we're going to go over terms and definitions here. And the key to understanding these labels, that they exist in order to help us LGBTQIA people and identities find community and feel seen. It can help people feel comfortable in understanding themselves. It helps people have a shared language about what we're talking about and the things that really matter to queer people and the queer community. I will also want to say that these aren't necessarily blanket terms, right? People might have different definitions for things that I'm going to give you definitions for. So people might describe it a little bit differently than the way that I'm going to say it. But this helps you get a base knowledge. And I just want to ensure that we're all talking about the same thing and on the same playing field when we talk about 2S LGBTQIA plus identities. So let's go to the next slide. Two-spirit is the 2S. You might be wondering, why are there numbers now, right? So the 2S, two-spirit, a person who has both a masculine and feminine spirit. And this is a word that should only be used by people indigenous to Turtle Island or North America, as we know it, to describe their sexual, gender, and or spiritual identity. And this is an umbrella term that may encompass same-sex attraction and a variety of gender variances. L, lesbian, a woman who is emotionally, romantically, or sexually attracted to other women. Women and non-binary people may also use this term to describe themselves. Gay, a person who is emotionally, romantically, or sexually attracted to members of the same gender. Men, women, and non-binary people may use this term as well to describe themselves. Sometimes I like to say that gay is often used as an umbrella term. So you may hear this word come from many people. We'll talk about the word queer too, and how it is a source of empowerment for people more than it is derogatory. B, bisexual, an individual who is emotionally, physically, and or sexually attracted to multiple sexes and genders. T, a term for people whose gender identity differs from the sex that they were assigned at birth. So there's a couple words probably floating on this slide that you may not be as familiar with. Non-binary, right? Sex assigned at birth. These are words just kind of muddle over just for a moment. I'm going to leave you in antissa. Next slide. Patient. Queer, often used as an umbrella term to describe anyone who is not heterosexual or cisgender, or the community as a whole. I like to use this word queer to describe myself as a person who is non-binary, as a person who has been queered by the church often. I am a Christian, and I like to say that because I am queer, and I'm proud of being queer, and I'm also proud of the traditions that I have grown up with. And so we use this term queer, and a lot of people have a lot of baggage when it comes to the word queer. I also remember being bullied in school, and I can remember being called a queer, right? And it was used pretty derogatorily towards me. And so, but there's a whole generation of young people who know this term as a source of empowerment. In some ways, we have in some ways they see this word as a way to help describe their non-binary identity, or maybe those which they might be attracted to, right? They don't feel as if lesbian, gay, bisexual fits those who they might be attracted to and who they might be emotionally in a relationship with. So this word queer has taken on a new identity as a source of real empowerment for people. Another cue up here is questioning, a term used to describe people who are in the process of exploring their sexual orientation or gender identity. And we want to be able to support people and recognize that people are on a journey. People are still trying to figure themselves out. We have people who are in their 80s and they're transitioning for the first time, right? They might be assigned male at birth and they're female, right? They might be transitioning for the first time, or people coming out as gay for the first time in their 60s, you know? So people are learning, they're questioning, they're beginning to question. And that's why I really like the word queer too, right? When we talk about the word queer, there's this word query, right? To bring things into question. And I think that queer people have the power to bring things into question. Intersex. Intersex people are born with a variety of differences in their sex traits and reproductive anatomy, including differences in genitalia, chromosomes, gonad, internal sex organs, hormone production, hormone response, and secondary sex traits. We like to bring this up because the existence of intersex people, that even sex is not binary. The existence of intersex people reminds us that though we might be born differently with ambiguous anatomy, there's this term that's used a lot, this binary of male and female, even from birth, that is a myth. We don't live in a totally binary world. We live in a gray space, a non-binary space. Asexual or aromantic. Asexuality and aromanticism exists on a spectrum, and it's a term used to describe someone who does not experience sexual attraction or experiences rarely or only under certain conditions or circumstances. Aromanticism is a term for individuals who do not experience romantic attraction. That's also on a spectrum, too. So when we're talking about aromantic, asexuality, these things all are on a spectrum. There might be conditions or maybe not at all. And then last, the plus. I love the plus. The plus is used as signifying an ever-growing list of the gender identities and orientations that may not be represented in these letters. So the plus leaves room for us to grow, to learn, to expand. It leaves us room to explore even more. Let's go to the next slide. So a term that I used a little bit before was this term, these terms, sex assigned at birth. And so sex assigned at birth is a category assigned to each of us at birth, almost always based on the appearance of external anatomy. So like, my brother was born, right, and 7 years before me, and he came out of the womb and they said, "It's a boy," because he had a penis, right? And they say, "It's a boy," and they do a little M on his birth certificate and all this stuff, and family goes on their way, blah, blah, blah. And then I come out and they say, "It's a boy," right? And then I grow up and I'm kind of like, what is gender even? Where are we going with this? What does this mean for me as a mask-presenting person? What does this mean for me as a person that exists within the world? And I'm still on that journey, and that's okay. As we think about our gender and the ways that it fits into the world and the binary world that we often live in, sex assigned at birth is something that is assigned to us. Sex assigned at birth and gender are two very different things. While it's typically none of our business what someone else's sex assigned at birth is, it is important to understand that sex assigned at birth includes because it helps people understand their bodies so that we can get the informed decisions that we need to get to about our health, so that we can talk to our doctors, so that we can talk to other people about our needs as people. And so, especially when we're talking about trans people, we like to say this phrase, sex assigned at birth, when we're talking about people who may be non-binary, too. I was assigned male at birth. We can go to the next slide. This is one of my favorites, because no matter what Elon Musk says the word cisgender is not a slur, it is not a curse word. It is a word that is used to describe somebody whose gender identity matches the sex that they were assigned at birth. Like my brother. My brother, who is 7 years older than I am, assigned male at birth, has lived his whole life, has 3 wonderful children, and that's how he's lived his life. Transgender, a term for people whose gender identity differs from the sex that they were assigned at birth. And then underneath that, we have this other term, non-binary, which is also an umbrella term. I guess queer people love umbrellas, and I'm not sure why, but there's this beautiful picture here that gives you a little bit of an illustration. So if you look on each side of the first umbrella, you have trans men and trans women, kind of binary, right, on either side of the umbrella handle. And then the non-binary should really just be one of those hats, those umbrella hats that people wear, because there's no binary, right? There's the binary that divides is non-existent for non-binary people. And so non-binary, a term for people who may identify as being both a man, a woman, somewhere in between, or falling completely outside of these categories. While many also identify as transgendered, not all non-binary people do. Non-binary can be used as an umbrella term encompassing many identities. And as you can see, there's many, many words under the non-binary umbrella, and I encourage you to look these up. I don't know all of them off the top of my head, and that's okay. We just need to learn to respect those terms, think about the ways that these terms help people identify themselves and find community. We can go to the next slide. So why is this all important when we're talking about gender affirmation? First of all, gender affirmation is the process of coming to recognize, accept, and express one's gender identity. Many people, regardless of their gender identity, affirm their gender in different ways. Gender is affirmed in our everyday by the fingernail polish we may or may not wear. It may be affirmed by the pants that we may or may not wear, and may be affirmed by hair or lack of, right? Gender affirmation and transition can refer to the period of time when a person makes changes others can perceive. So this might be a person's name, their appearance, their presentation. So when people are in this process of affirmation, it may be things that you can take notice of. But it also may not be things that you take notice of right away. This can include social, medical, or legal components. And this process of coming to affirm one's gender can greatly improve a person's mental health and their well-being. This is a statistic from the Trevor Project that I like to point out. So this is LGBTQ plus young people who attempted suicide in the past year across these two. So first it says 27% of youth who experienced physical threat or harm due to their sexual orientation or gender identity in the past year have thought about suicide, have attempted suicide in the past year. 9% who have not experienced physical threat or harm due to their orientation or gender identity in the past year. This is from 2023, so this most recent year. These are statistics from the Trevor Project. And the reason why I bring these to attention is that we're talking about dismantling hate. We're talking about the ways that we can root it out in our communities, the ways in which we can affirm and uplift young people who might be questioning in the midst of their transition. This type of community care, of caring for young people, rather than condemning them, saying they don't belong in certain spaces, this can be life-saving. There's another statistic that I couldn't find an updated statistic about it, sadly, but another statistic that's shared by the Trevor Project, I think a year ago, was talking about the rate of suicide attempts for young people who had in relation to the number of affirming spaces that they have. So those who do not have affirming spaces or affirming communities, their rate of suicide or suicide attempts go up. So those who have a school that is affirming of them, one school percentage drop. If they have parents, a home that affirms them, another percentage drop. A church that affirms them, another percentage drop. A community, neighbors, people that affirm them, those percentages drop significantly. So the work of dismantling hate, the work of creating affirming spaces, is life-saving. Let's go to the next one. This is important because forcing transgender people to fit within the sex or gender roles that they were assigned at birth causes substantial psychological pain and is medically unethical. Serious health risks are reversed when transgender people are allowed to socially transition in ways that are consistent with their gender identity, and they receive support from families, schools, peers, worshiping spaces. There's two terms here that I like us to think deeply about: gender incongruence and gender dysphoria. So these are terms where there's a clinically significant distress caused when a person's assigned birth is not the same as the one with which they identify. While it's a common experience of trans people, not all trans people experience dysphoric feelings. And we need to be sure that this is different than body dysmorphia when we're talking about these things. People who are living with eating disorders is very different than people who are transitioning or in the midst of transitioning, right? We think about those things very differently. Let's go to the next slide. So I want you to take a couple minutes to reflect on these questions. Maybe just one or two. If someone were to come out as LGBTQIA2S+, what would your first thought be? 2, if you don't identify as queer, how would you feel if people thought you were queer? Finally, can you think of 3 historical figures who are lesbian, gay, or bisexual? What about trans or non-binary historical figures? So take a moment to think about that as I get a sip of water. All right, this is the worst part of the presentation for our presenter. Going to ask for audience feedback. Any of these questions stick out to you, or you have some kind of reaction when you're thinking about it? Anybody want to share a reflection that they have? Thank God. Thank you.
I worked at a Girl Scout camp many years ago, and because I hugged other women, according to some of the kids, I was therefore gay. And when somebody told me this, they were very upset. And I'm like, okay, first off, hugging people does not make somebody gay.
Mm-mm.
And I was very upset that the kids felt that way.
Mm.
And I had no way of, I didn't know which kids were doing it, or how I could show them that this does not make somebody gay just because you hug somebody.
Yes. Yeah. Working at a camp, hugging people
Yes.
doesn't make you gay. Yeah. Yeah.
When my grandson came out as trans, my first reaction was, oh my dear, how hard his life is going to be.
Mm. Mm. So there was a sense of they shared that when their son came out as trans, they were like how hard their life is going to be. Your first reaction was almost preservation of your grandchild's life, right? Of thinking about the ways.
Obstacles that were going to occur.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. I appreciate it. Any other? Yeah, please.
One of my best friends, well, may I use the microphone? So
Yes, thank you. Good idea.
I'm hard of hearing, so I don't hear.
Don't want to get feedback. Good.
Okay. So one of my best friends from high school, she came out to me when we were freshmen in college, or first year students in college.
Mhm.
And I told her that I loved her and that no matter what, who she is will be the memories that I have with her and all the experiences that we have, and that I was proud that she shared it with me, as I thought it was really a beautiful thing.
Yeah, that's a beautiful reaction. Thank you. Yeah, I think sometimes there's like this, reaction to say like, oh, I always knew you were gay. That's not helpful because you didn't know. You were assuming. You got confirmation from me, right? You didn't know. You assumed. Any other reactions to any of this? Yeah, Hannah.
I was just going to say,
Give you a mic.
here I am from out front taking up time. But I was thinking about this last one and how the historical figures that I can think of are because I sought that out and not because of what I was taught in school.
That's a
That's
really great
interesting.
point. Yeah, often we find historical figures as we look, queer historical figures as we look through social media, right? Forgotten stories that are shared on social media or ways that we hear about these through other sources of media. We seek them out, right? We look for the queer biopics, right? We look for those stories that might go untold in our classrooms. Thanks, Hannah. Yeah, Darby.
I would share that when our oldest figured out that he was trans, it was like actually a gift from a mental health perspective and things. The risk of suicidal behavior and depression and all that stuff went down, and our whole family rallied around, and we were fine with it. But like somebody said earlier, it takes a strong person because right now society is not so embracing everywhere. So
Yeah, thanks. Any other reactions from this side of the room? That's fine. Oh, thank you.
If somebody come to me and told me straight out, I'd be glad because they know their anatomy, they know what they want, and it makes them feel more comfortable with themselves. Which, if they're comfortable with themselves, then they're comfortable with everybody else, and then everybody else is more comfortable with them.
Beautiful. Yeah, recognizing people's autonomy is important if somebody comes out to you, right? Recognizing their own self-power, who they are, who they want to be, who they've been. So one of the things that I like to think about when we're talking about dismantling hate, as we're thinking about ridding our communities of hate, is our own bias, the bias that comes in to our life, right? So there's this individual experiences and social conditioning, the ways that the world works, the things that happen around us, the ways that we're raised, the communities we live in, the homes that we're in, right? These all have some type of impact on us. And then there's this mysterious thing where we process everything that we are still trying to figure out called the brain, right? It's the way that we process all of the information that is bombarded to us, either just through the way that the world works and we figure it out and our brain rewires itself to think that way. And also there's the things that like straight up come out of somebody's mouth that help to formulate our brain and the things that we're thinking about. And sometimes, a lot of the times, these can form unconscious bias. Things that we don't even think about, and the biases that we carry around, unconscious bias. There's a whole field of study around unconscious bias, and when we think about this helps us to, when we begin to examine our biases, we can begin to dismantle the hate, there's animosity, our preferences that we don't even know about, right? I'm sorry, I'm just getting back from vacation. Today is the first day back. I spent 5 days in Palm Springs, Florida. No, California, I don't even know where I was. So I'm just coming back from all of that, and so like today, you got me. All right, so words have just been flying out of my brain. So let's go to that next slide. And so when we're thinking about and we're examining our personal beliefs, we all bring our own personal beliefs and biases to the spaces we occupy. And that's okay. That's okay. To recognize that is important, but we also need to check our biases, our own personal biases, the things that we subconsciously gravitate towards, or those things that we subconsciously push away. So people are not born with prejudices or biases. These are learned behaviors. These are learned behaviors from the ways that the world works around us, the homes that we were raised in, sometimes influenced by who we should or should not be. All of us, either queer or not, have learned messages about the queer and trans community in some way. I remember growing up, there were no gay people on television except for Will and Grace, right? And they were always the butt of a joke. Oh gosh, what's that show on MTV where they were on the bus and they were speed dating? No, not Road Rules, but they were there was this speed dating. Do you know what I'm talking about? Next! Yes, it was Next. Okay, so it was this gay, it wasn't all gay. Those were the ones that I was interested in. It was this speed dating thing, and so they'd be out on this date, and somebody would literally walk off the bus, and the other person would go, next. So rude, don't even know that person. It's great, there's reels of it on TikTok or whatever. So sometimes we get these messages about queer people, that they're butt of a joke, right? That they're just shallow, right? Or these are the messages that I grew up with about queer people. But also I heard that queer people are going to hell, right? You can be turned straight again. Queer people it's a mental disorder for people. These are the messages that I grew up with. So we have these messages about queer people that we walk around with. So reflect on what were your earliest messages you received about 2S LGBTQIA plus people. Think about those messages. Where'd they come from? Were they positive, negative, neutral? When we begin to ask these questions, not just about queer people, but people in general, we begin to understand the beliefs and the biases, where they come from, and then we can begin to change that narrative in our own brain. These are some questions to consider. I encourage you to take a picture as you walk away from here about these, for you to examine your own biases. How do my current beliefs serve me? What might I lose if I change my beliefs? What are costs of maintaining my current perspectives? And how might it benefit me to change? What are the identities, the people that we have been told to be cautious of, to be leery of? And how can we begin to rewire our brains to think differently about the messages that we have been served? Let's go to the next slide. I talk about bias, and because these biases can lead to manifested hate. So we're going to take a moment to talk about what are hate-based crimes, what are bias-based incidents, what's the difference, and what you can begin to do about it. So, bias-based incidents. We can go to the next slide. Bias incidents are hostile expressions that may be motivated by another person's race, color, disability, religion, national origin, sexual orientation, or gender identity. The act does not need to be a federal, state, tribal, or a local crime. Doesn't necessarily have to be a crime, could be an incident, and it could be motivated by our biases. Our next slide has some examples. Bias incidents can be verbal, They can be physical or visual. This language and behavior often contribute to or create an unsafe or unwelcoming environment. Some examples include name calling, using a racial, ethnic, or other slur to identify somebody, using degrading language, or knowingly using the wrong name of a person or gender. Another one, creating racist or derogatory images or drawings. We've seen incidences of people going into Jewish cemeteries and writing anti-Semitic things on gravestones and headstones. We've seen people breaking into temples and graffitiing all over their walls in these worshiping spaces. Also another, oh my gosh, it's almost 2, okay. I have 5 minutes to get through 20 slides, just kidding. And then imitating someone with a disability or intimidating someone's cultural norm or practice. These are bias-based incidents. Let's go to the next slide. A hate crime is a crime that is motivated on bias. A crime plus a motivation based on bias. While reporting hate crimes is important for our community's safety, we also must have pathways to reporting incidents that make our communities unsafe for all people. Bias-based incidences can lead to hate crimes. The rise in rhetoric that threatens the safety of community members inevitably escalates to violence. This next slide is from the Southern Poverty Law Center, and it shows in 2022 that they tracked 1,225 hate and anti-government groups across the United States. This is a great little interactive map. If you go back, if you scan that QR code, this takes you to the Southern Poverty Law Center, and you can see each of the hate and anti-government groups in each state. We have 19 in the state of Minnesota. 19 here operating in our state, and there are many more. In 2023, Minnesota passed bill reforms to more accurately count and combat hate in our state. This means that they're beginning to track bias-based incidences. So there were these 2 omnibus bills, and they provided funding to the communities and also to the Minnesota Department of Human Rights. So this is to improve bias-based discrimination data gathering and reporting. Therefore, you can call, you can report an incident, and then there's a bias-based response and community equity outreach team that can help you navigate and get the resources that you might need if you are the recipient of hate crime or a bias-based incident. There's Communities Combating Hate, stophatemn.org. There's another QR code for you, stophatemn.org. This gives you great resources that you can find in order to report bias-based incidences. So we've seen people who tear down pride flags in front yards, who have graffitied on lawn signs. These are bias-based incidences and hate crimes that can be reported not to the police, but to the this Minnesota team in order for you to get the resources that you need. Let's go. Oh, 10? Thanks, okay. I won't take that long, but thank you. If we can go to the next slide. So one of the things that we can begin to do as we think about uprooting hate, dismantling hate in our communities is to have these conversations with people in our homes, with our friends, with our roommates, with our loved ones. We can begin to have this conversation. But I want us, as we begin to kind of go into these conversations, what's the goal of having this conversation, a loved one, about hate crimes or bias-based incidences? I like to think that it's about planting seeds. It's beginning to plant seeds that can be harvested a little bit later. You won't change anyone's mind from one conversation. I've never changed my mind about anything ever. Just kidding. I've never changed my mind from one conversation. It has required many conversations and my own personal experiences in order for me to change my mind. It's how the mind works. We also learn a lot through narratives and storytelling. If we can relate to somebody and we can hear their story, that's how we can begin to break down our own biases and sharing those narratives with other people. So we are looking to disrupt the narrative, chip away at silos they've arrived in, and plant the seeds for creating change and building empathy. We want to build empathy in people. None of this is impossible unless we take the first step of engaging in the conversation. Let's go to the next slide. So as you prepare for the conversation, there's a few things that I want you to do as you think about how you're going to prepare yourself. Examine your boundaries, right? Determine what you have the capacity for and your own personal boundaries. Are you ready to have this conversation? And these type of conversations with people we love the most can be really difficult. Plan it out. Think about a scenario. Think of all the funny and silly and ways that you're going to help to turn this conversation into an actual conversation where there's jokes, right? Where there's, back and forth. I'm not a very serious person, as you can probably tell. So I like to have some humor in the things that I talk about and give examples of my own life and how it might help to inform them. Imagine how you imagine the conversation going and have a plan for after to decompress, practice some self-care. But the most important part is it's authentic to you when you're having this conversation. I talk about bringing levity. You may be a more serious person than I am, and that's great. Are they ready? Determine if they're actually ready to have this conversation. Break it down. Be prepared to break it down a little bit slower. It's easier to have difficult conversations with people who know you care about them as well and know that they care about you. This takes a lot of pre-work, but building community, knowing who these people are, knowing your neighbors, makes it much easier to have these really difficult conversations. Because when we think about bias-based crimes and hate crimes, often these are fueled by this idea of belonging to a certain group. There's a sense of belonging when it comes to Proud Boys. There's a sense of belonging when it comes to these hate groups that the Southern Poverty Law Center is following. They have found some sense of community in there. And what can we do to combat hate is build more community. Getting to know our neighbors, fill in those gaps. And then challenge sources of information. Ask them to diversify the ways that they get their news, right? The ways that they ask people to challenge them not to scroll on Facebook for a week, right? That's a hard one for my parents. It's a hard one. This next slide shows that there are 4 core values that we have found that these are a place where people can connect, and these are the things that we hold really dearly as Americans, where you can begin to build a conversation that goes across differences and begins to build community. So we have this idea of rights, we have this idea of freedom, trust, and autonomy and agency. These 4 cornerstones are places where we have found that people actually find the most common ground. That these are places where we can begin to think about our own values and how does the experience of trans people translate into one of these 4 cornerstones of shared values. So one of the things, I have an example of a conversation. Let's go to that. So you might have something, we can go to the next slide, Julie. when we're talking about this, when we're beginning to have this conversation, I encourage you to use this as kind of a blueprint for yourself in a way that you can begin to think about having these difficult conversations. So in practice, name what it is you want to have the conversation is. Name the problem. And I'm saying the problem because there's no better way for us to kind of say it, because it's a problem in that it's a situation that we're facing and we're navigating together, right? I understand that you have strong religious beliefs about trans healthcare, but people I know and love are really being harmed because you want to impose that belief on everyone. And this prevents others from making their own choices. Rights, autonomy, and agency. Those things are in that right off the bat when we're talking about this, when we're having this difficult conversation. And then you begin to extrapolate a little bit more, connect to that core value. I'm religious too, but I see this issue differently. A lot of other faiths and non-believers see it very differently as well. I don't want folks to impose their religious beliefs on me, on this or other issues important to me. And I hope you feel the same way. Everyone has the right to follow their own faith, beliefs, and conscience to make decisions on health care, and I trust people to do that. Trust, rights, freedom, autonomy, and agency. And then name a solution. So that's why I support a truly inclusive religious freedom when it comes to these types of things, where you and I are both allowed to believe as we choose and live our life by those beliefs just as long as it isn't imposing harm to others. Freedom, autonomy, trust, rights. This is where we begin to kind of bring that solution out a little bit more. This next thing is a plan of action. I'm going to wrap up here. Considering the following questions as you walk away from here today, as after the panel. What are conversations you can have with people in your life to share the knowledge that you have gained today? What are those conversations that you can begin to have about the things that you've learned about the alphabet that I shared before? What is something from there that you can take with you? What's something key that you can take with you when we're talking about dismantling hate within our community, especially when we're talking about our biases towards LGBTQ+ people? And then what are some actions you can take to address bias and hate in your community? What are the conversations you can have? And then what are the actions that you can take? Being here today is a great start of action, right? This is the beginning as we think about this. If you can go to the next slide. Feel free to reach out to us. My last name is terrible, but my first name is really easy. Matt@outfront.org. If you'd like to leave some comments, those are really, really helpful. You can scan that QR code, and that will take you to a page that helps us to think about our trainings a little bit better, and I would love to get some feedback on that. And then we are always available online at outfront.org. So please feel free to reach out to us. A lot of resources there. We have a legislative tracker of the things that we are following in this next legislative session. If you're looking for a welcoming worshiping space, we have those resources too. If you're looking for more trainings, we have those. If you're looking for education, things about education and school boards and all of those things, we have all of those resources there. So please check out our website. I think we're going to break, and then, yeah, Sue, I'll let you take over.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
But we elders would like to leave you with 3 names before you take that break. Johnny Mathis, James Baldwin, are you ready? Liberace. Take a break, put your cards in the basket with your questions, and we'll be back with our panel. Thank you.
All right, let's go ahead and get started. We have one person who's not able to be with us today. As a former teacher, I respect the fact that sometimes school weeks can get hard, so we do not have Jose with us today, but I'm going to go ahead and sit, and that way we can pass our microphone to each other. Do these both work? Yeah, so then maybe you all can pass between each other. So I'm Hannah Edwards. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the training manager at Outfront, and I'm also the executive director of a group called Transforming Families. Transforming Families is a peer-led support group for trans and non-binary youth and their parents and caregivers. So I have a 13-year-old trans child who's happy and thriving because of all of the things Matt said. We affirm her in all aspects of her life. And so I'm here today to help facilitate the panel. And so I'll be asking questions of these lovely people sitting next to me, and they're going to impart some of their wisdom on us so that we know more as we leave today. So I'm just going to go ahead first and say thank you for being here, and I'm going to pass you the mic if you could share a little bit about who you are and what brings you here, and if you're comfortable, obviously your name and pronouns.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Joyce Tofty. My pronouns are she, her mix. There's not really any unfamiliar faces in this room right now. I work here at SMSU in University Public Safety. I'm also the co-founder of the MORE Network, which stands for Marshall Mustangs Overcoming Racism Through Education. We're an anti-racism nonprofit in Southwest Minnesota. I also work as a crime victims advocate for New Horizons Crisis Center, assisting those in needs for general crime and sexual violence advocacy. And I'm also a part of the City of Marshall's Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Commission. So why I'm existing in this space is the intersectionality of creating safe communities and making sure that I'm present to contribute to the conversation of what does safety look like for individual self-identified needs.
So my name is Julie Walker. My pronouns are also she, her mix. And I am here wearing a lot of different hats today. I'm a professor of communication studies here at SMSU, but I'm also the director of the Women's Center and the LGBTQ Plus Center, and I'm the coach of the speech team, one of them. I'm also here as the Pride Planning Committee chair for Marshall Pride. So I think that there's a lot of spaces that I get the opportunity to exist in where a lot of people share really not great things with me. I have heard a lot of very awful, horrible, no good, very bad days, in the worst sense of the word. And it's when people talk about what it's like living in Marshall, and oftentimes when people from the cities talk about what it's like living in Marshall, they come in with big expectations about the big feelings people have here. And while I think that's true in some cases, there are some very loud people in this community with very big feelings. I've also found some incredible community here. And it's in those safe spaces, those community bubbles of people who have become my chosen family, who have become safe spaces for me and my children and the people I care about, that I feel like I've been able to thrive. And so one of my goals in this community and in this panel is to share the power of building community with one another across multiple intersecting identities, because it's all of our responsibility to make sure that we can all thrive, particularly when our town's motto is cultivating the best in all of us. That has to include all of us. So I think it's really important that we're here building community together.
Dang, how do I follow that up? Whew. I feel like an absolute slacker now. Wow. So, okay, starting with my name, I'm Leo. Come from the Upper Sioux community. My pronouns are he, him, cisgendered male. So I do feel a little awkward being invited to be a part of this panel because I don't really relate directly. So I don't want to come across as a fake, but I am definitely an ally. At one point, somebody asked me, what would you do if one of your kids came to you and said they were gay? Nothing. I mean, what would I do? Just love them the same as I do now. And it's like, I'm always surprised when I hear people talk about stuff like that. It's like, what would you change? I mean, if it's your child and you love them and they came from you and they're a part of you, why would you change anything about that? So I was really appreciative that Darwin invited me to be a part of this panel, really enjoying it so far. It's like learning a lot. Didn't realize that LGBTQ expanded quite so much. And, hey, I'm all for it. Why can't we just accept everybody? It's 2024. That's one of my favorite phrases with my kids as they're growing up is like, it used to be, it's 2023, no judgments. It's 2024, no judgments. Love who you want to love. So I come from the upstate community. I'm a Native American drum and dance performer. So we go around to a lot of different powwows and stuff. And because of that, my kids have experienced a lot of really hateful and biased incidents in school and outside of school. You know, some of you might have noticed I got a long ponytail, and my son, his hair is long. And unfortunately, some people try to label him as gay just because he has long hair. So if a woman has short hair, does that make her a man or gay? I don't think so. I don't remember any woman just suddenly getting her hair cut and turning lesbian. That's not something I'm aware of that happens.
Sometimes.
Oh, sometimes.
Just teasing.
You know,
A little bit of humor.
so if a guy grows his hair, suddenly he's like, hey, no. But this is really great. I mean, I appreciate being here. I'm not a professor. I do have a bachelor's degree. We'll move on to the questions and stuff.
Yeah, well, so I also wanted to point out that we tried to have a wide variety of people with different backgrounds and experiences, and allies, right? So it's not, while our presentation, because we're out front, is very 2S LGBTQIA plus specific, we want to recognize that bias and hate happens across communities. But we love our allies. Allies are great too. So the first question we have here really gets to the heart of things. We want to know if there are any examples of anti-bias or hate and speakers that promote bias and hate, maybe coming to your community here in Marshall, and then how was it received, and maybe what are some of the ways that you tried to counteract some of that? And you can go down the line, or if someone has something to say, yeah.
Not it.
Well, I don't think we have to pull in people from outside our community to find people saying not good, very bad things, to keep that metaphor going. I think that there are, as I mentioned earlier, people in this community who are very loud. And when you're loud, it sounds like there's a lot of people. But when you take that microphone and power away from someone, you realize that the number of non-accepting people in the community is actually a lot smaller than we think. We look at nationally, 70% of people are supportive of the LGBTQ plus community. So I think that in itself, when you look at it, regardless of voting demographics or anything else in this part of the state, there's more people who are affirming, but it's scary to come out as affirming as a business or an organization sometimes because of the loud folks in our community. So, well, I think that there's plenty of people out there that are, coming into Marshall, maybe saying unkind things. We've had speakers come in and talk about anti-CRT work. We've had speakers come in and talk about a number of different things. I think we perhaps need to focus more on what's going on directly in our community first, before we focus on some of those external purveyors of hatred.
Yeah, I really just kind of want to co-sign what you said, where it's really easy for a community to, I think what we're going with the question is, can you name the hate groups? Like who are the people, who are the voices, and who are the external influencers? And that's easy. The hard work is having conversations with your brother or your sister or your grandparents and saying like, ooh, we don't use the R slur anymore, or ooh, the F word, the short one, we don't say that. Yeah, like I was like, well, I mean, not the FU one. Okay, we can say that, but but having those hard conversations, that's really where we can start to build community and holding our loved ones accountable. It's very easy to say, oh, they came from a different time, or things are okay back then, you were allowed to say that. And we can't continue to make excuses for our loved ones in a community if we genuinely care about community. Allowing people to continue in those actions ostracizes them from community. And that's not the spaces that we want to create.
All right, she had mentioned something like going back in time, it's always been done this way. You know, for some of us that are native, how many of you guys went to a school that had a native mascot? Anybody? Over there? What was it? The Chiefs, Redskins, what, or?
It was the Arrows, but it was little gummy.
Pipestone? They have that, that chief and princess or something thing too at homecoming, don't they? Didn't it? What was that called?
Not when I was there.
Yeah, but I mean, that's one of them things, like, a mascot? When's the last time you looked at a mascot and seen it as an equal? Any of you ever look at the Chicago Bears, like, yep, I'm same as a bear? Nope. Nope. I mean, most people kind of look at a mascot as like a court jester, somebody to be entertaining, you know, something less than. You're up here, your mascots are down there. And it dehumanizes us. You know, and then they take our culture and they appropriate it. And they're like, well, we've been doing this for 80 years. Why are you suddenly upset? Really? Yeah, like, or 100 years. Like, okay, so back in the minstrel era, when they're wearing blackface, they did that for a long time too, but it wouldn't be acceptable today, would it? Or what if they had the Washington Saints or, well, the popes or something like that? Everybody showed up dressed like the Pope. Or the opposing team came out and said, hey, we're going to make a caricature of your Pope, and we're going to put a little boy's feet underneath his robes. People would be pissed, right? But when it's Native Americans, they brush it off. Like, we've had the Redskins for years, we had the Chiefs for years, the Atlanta Braves, the Cleveland Indians, whatever mascot you want to have, Chief Illiwick, you know, and they just make us into this characterization that's not real. Just feeding into the genocide that we don't exist. We're a mascot, we're a Halloween costume, we're historical figures. But anybody got Google on their phone right now? How many Native Americans are in the United States right now? Anybody know? Anybody want to take a quick guess?
We're Googling.
Quickly. Who's got a good signal?
That's the other thing.
And then somebody else Google, what's the current population in the United States? I just Googled a little bit ago and I was standing in the back cheating. It said like 342 million people in the United States. How many Native Americans are there? Anybody find it yet? 2.7 million. When I Googled it, it said 3.7 million. And that's everybody checking the box that says they're Native. And it's like, me, I'm a half-breed, you know? But it's like, I want to be present in this space. I want to be upfront recognized, you know? So, you know, when you talk about things that have always been, racism's always been, hate's always been. We can start to change that. I'm pass.
I mean, I think that connects to everything too. So it's like challenging these groups. Where are they coming from? Are they part of our community? Why are we listening to them? They're a small minority. And then combating it with stories and putting a face, right, to this bias that's existed and this hatred, right, for so long. Okay, so these next ones kind of get to the heart of students, right? And so we have a few questions that are really about our schools. And so the first one was, where did it go? Nope, that's not it either. They're all the same color, so I'm having a hard time. How can teachers and educators support their LGBTQIA2S+ students when school districts increasingly are prohibiting visible signs or acts of support? So for example, we're seeing all over, including I think here and in Worthington. I mean, it's people are trying this all across the state right now. You know, banning of pride flags in classrooms or in schools in general. People wanting to talk about banning LGBTQ inclusive books in classrooms and libraries. So how can you support your students in this day and age?
I'm gonna start with like the small scale and like the individual level. It's the way you show up. So back when I was a restaurant manager, all my interviews, I'd always introduce myself and say my pronouns. It's just like word vomit. I don't think about it. You know, my name is Joyce Tofty. My pronouns are she, her mix. And I remember I had an employee, and I didn't know at the time because I hadn't hired them at the time, and I ended up hiring them. But after the fact, they told me they went home and cried after the interview because that was the first time someone had ever like led with that, and they were transitioning. And so it was the first time they felt in a work environment of, I'm safe here. That was the signal, right? Just I introduced my pronouns and they were like, I want this job, right? This is a place that does pronouns. It's such a simple gesture to lead with safety in the way that we show up in spaces. That doesn't have to be, I have all these dog whistles of safety. If we're in a space that maybe the privilege doesn't exist for you to have the dog whistles of safety. Maybe you're working in a school district where you aren't able to have a pride flag. Just showing up in those spaces in a way that shows people that I'm someone that you can connect with, that you are safe with me, and then we can work together to dismantle all of the other barriers that exist to make spaces unsafety. But I say step one is to, on the individual level, be that person.
I think I wholeheartedly back up what Joyce said. I think that's really important work. I also think that it's important for us to recognize when we are not in a position of privilege and to, as was talked about in the presentation today, recognize when we have the capacity and the ability, because to act in some of these, ways to defend trans students or ways to defend students who are expressing their racial identities, fighting against school dress codes that might disenfranchise people because of hairstyles, any number of fighting against racist mascots, right? The ability to fight against that itself can be an act of privilege. If you do not have job security, that may not be something that you have the capacity to fight for yet. But by the same token, that means when we do have the privilege to do something, we have a responsibility to act. When we are in those positions of power and privilege, and we do have those pieces of security, it is our responsibility to act. And that's a time when I think when we get to those positions of power that we sit down, we're like, oh, finally I got here. I have tenure. I've done whatever. I've advanced in my career. Now I can finally relax. No, that's when the work begins. When we have the ability, it's our responsibility. That's what we have to do. I think also, though, we can recognize that as we're engaging in these actions, we are in the state of Minnesota, where there are so many more protected classes than there are in other states. Our human rights laws in Minnesota protect sexual orientation and gender identity. They're literally protected classes in our state. So when we see these actions happening, we can partner with our larger statewide organizations like Transforming Families, Outfront Minnesota, Gender Justice, and engage in these acts of lobbying and litigation to change the structures of our state. Because we know we've seen the power of collective action across the United States in bargaining units, in workplaces. We saw this with the George Floyd protests that have happened. We've seen this globally, the power that we have when we collectively act together. And it's through that collective action, they can pull out one of us, they can pluck one of us from a space, but they cannot stop all of us when we are moving towards a more equitable future, and that's what we need to be doing.
Wow.
I tried to let you go first.
Yeah, I should have. I really should have. It's like, oh. So, part of my background, I substitute teach, and I substitute teach out here in rural Minnesota. And I mean, that's a really touchy question that she posed. There's one of the schools I sub at, the choir teacher identifies as non-binary. When he stood up in front of his class at the beginning of this year, he introduced himself and he said he's non-binary, he goes by they, them. And they're going around to the different students. One of the students, when it was this boy's turn, he said, I identify as he, him, because there's only two genders like God intended. So the student got in a little bit of trouble, but the teacher also had a nice little talking to because he is brand new to the district. That was a sensitive topic that he probably shouldn't have brought up in front of students for whatever reason, so he was kind of giving some warning. You know, as a sub, I have to be very careful going into different spaces all the time. There's another school that I subbed at the principal, right on day one during orientation, I happened to be there because one of the teachers couldn't be there, and he said, we're not gonna discuss politics this year at all. You know, because you can't change somebody's mind no matter what you say. People are going to be locked into their positions, and we're not going to fight and argue about this in class because you're not going to be able to change their minds. So for me, it's like I have to try to find subtle ways to show students that I'm in support of them and their positions. One of my favorite sayings is, whatever year it is, it's 2024 and there's no judgments. When someone starts saying something like that, I do try to call them out like, hey, what difference does that make? If someone's against gay marriage, don't get gay married. Pretty simple, right? And I was like, I'm sorry, if that's not your style, that's not what you're gonna do, just don't go, don't be there. Pretty simple. When students try to, bring out racist things towards each other, I just stop them as soon as I can, write them a ticket, send them right to the office. I really just don't play with it. I kind of call them out in front of the other students too, like, hey, this ain't cool. That's all I got for that question.
I'm only going to pop in as Out Front and Transforming Families and a former teacher who's seen some of this across the state happening over the last 5 years. And I want to say that it doesn't always need to be a big pride flag in your classroom. I know that the St. Cloud Public Schools had this issue come up, and they banned the pride flags in the classroom, and they started wearing it on their ID badge, right? And so a little flag on your ID badge, nobody's going to tell you, or they can try to tell you to take it off, but it's a personal thing, or your shirt that you wear, or the way that you carry yourself. So there's other ways of signaling to your students that you are a affirming person, a safe person. And then I agree with once you have tenure, get extra loud because your students need you to do that. All right, we probably have time for one more before our closing, so I'm trying to pick they're all great questions. Here's one. It says, what is the best way to uplift those struggling with their identity? And that could be, any of these protected classes that we're talking about that are more marginalized. What's a way that you can uplift a person who's kind of questioning things or claiming things and maybe facing some pushback in life?
Wow. That's not an easy question. But I think it almost has a overly simple answer for me. Just sitting there listening to them. Just acknowledging that they exist, that their differences aren't that important. Not to me anyway, that they're just another student, that I'm willing to help them same as any other student, that I'm willing to accept them for who they are. Just that absolute acceptance of what they're doing. Unless it's really weird, like they're killing cats, I can't get behind that. All right, here we go.
I think for me, in addition to listening, like Leo was talking about, which huge, right? Let's create spaces where people can be authentically themselves. I think for me, it's the power of doing the work on our own before we actually are engaging with the person. My children got a medical diagnosis at one point, and 2 or 3 years later, my partner's best friend, I was talking with him about something. And he said, oh yeah, I found out about that medical diagnosis when I did some research on it after your kids got diagnosed. And it floored me. I had no idea he had done this research outside of knowing them. He said, well, I'm their uncle, so I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna read about it. I'm gonna learn about it. And I was so captivated by that act of love that he did. And he didn't do it to tell me, oh, I did research on this because I love you. He didn't do it for the credit or the cookie. He did it so that he would know about that identity piece before he would have to. And I think that when we do that work, Leo, you showed everybody out here, we all know how to Google, right? We have the power of the information from across the world, and we know about so many organizations that we can go to. I think when we take responsibility to learn about these spaces and not to necessarily have to go up to someone and ask, like, hey, Joyce, so tell me about your hair. What's the deal? She may choose to do that. And she did at one point school me when I said something dumb. I was so dumb at one point. We were in a meeting. It was so bad. I'm like, oh, so we're going to have people for an hour for like hairstyling so we could do wash day, right? And she busted out laughing at me, how dumb I was in this moment, just this moment of just absolute lack of knowledge. And she kindly invited me in, and then after that, I took it as my responsibility. I needed to go do reading on that. I needed to go learn things. I needed to go follow TikTokers. I needed to go do these pieces on my own. Not so that I could go back to Joyce and be like, hey, I did the thing. Can I have my cookie now for being anti-racist? It was about trying to make sure that I could show up better for people that I care about, and people in my classroom, and people in my community.
The only addition I would add on to everything that y'all have said would be holding space for the struggle. So I think so often in our desire to uplift, we minimize people's lived experiences and their struggle. As a crime victims advocate, I run into this a lot with people who are trying to help their loved ones, their partners, or even just new advocates. Everyone wants to solve the problem. And it can be more harmful than just holding space and acknowledging maybe my lived experience is very different than yours, but I can acknowledge how hurtful this is, how harmful this is, how you have to carry that every day and I might not. And so there's power in holding space for someone's struggle and then also being able to help uplift them out through it. But while still acknowledging that my kind words today or my safe space today does not undo the harm, and it does not shield you from further harm for you or future generations. For me, I call myself just like an intersectional like misfit because I wear so many marginalized hats. Like I'm autistic, have like invisible physical disabilities. I am Afro-Indigenous, I'm queer. So I check a lot of boxes when people are doing like diversity stuff, right? But with that, it means that I also carry the wounds from my ancestors, and I know that moving forward, my son will have to deal with things, that his children will have to deal with things, future generations have to carry things, and so in the desire to uplift, we have to make sure that we don't minimize the lived experience of people and the burdens that they're carrying.
Wow, that's really powerful, holding space for both, right? The two sides, both and. I lied because we still have 12 minutes. I want to ask you one more question before our closing question. I think this is oftentimes overlooked too, but any advice that you might have either for students or for these more extreme groups, so these students who come in with this bias or these beliefs that are so strong, that are anti-LGBTQ or maybe anti-CRT or maybe maybe anti-Semitism, right? And then, so how do you respond to these groups, and how do you work with these students, right, who might have some of these beliefs?
They make these questions so easy, right? Let's just solve world peace right now while we're at it. For me personally, growing up in Granite Falls, Minnesota, pretty much taught that it's supposed to be Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. That's what I was taught from the very beginning, that homosexuality is the worst thing ever. It's a policemen, not person. It took going to school at the University of Minnesota Twin Cities, University of Minnesota Morris, Augsburg to expand my horizons, to be exposed to different people, and find out, like, hey, we're all pretty much just the same. Everybody wants to be loved. Everybody wants to be cared for. Everybody loves their family. Everybody has a family that loves them. That doesn't really change based on your race, your sexual orientation, any of those things. The real base of it is everybody just wants to be treated normally, right? Everybody just wants to be loved and accepted. And that's kind of what it took for me to kind of really change who I was, is to be exposed to other things. So that's what I try to do with my own children, is we try to go a lot of different places. We try to travel a lot, try to give them as much experience in life as possible to see that diversity is a great thing. That if we can all get together and do different group projects, they're going to find strengths amongst everybody else. So with these groups, when they come in and they've got these really hardcore set ideas, I try to question them, try to challenge them. Like, what difference would that make? Like, if somebody is homosexual, what difference does it make to your project? Does it add to it? Does it subtract to it? Does it make any difference at all? So I try to question them on things like that. Like, oh, they're black? How's that going to affect your project? It doesn't, does it? So I try to get in touch with them, try to show them that they're all pretty much the same when it comes down to the core.
We all need to use different strategies, I think. Matt talked about that in the presentation. We all have a different strategy and approach. Matt's approach is to use humor. My approach, and this is an aspect of privilege for me, because as Joyce talked about some of our marginalized, diverse, whatever categorization we want to use, some of our identities are more visible than others. And my identity, arguably, my identity as a member of the queer community isn't something you can just see. Although I talked to the class this semester, or the last semester, and I said, why do you think I'm here talking to your class? And they said, gay culture. And I was like, what made you look? And they're just like, just all of it. Yeah, I don't know, it's the hair. And I was like, well, yeah, that's when I became gay.
I told you.
Yeah. Cut it too short, dang it. As it grows out, maybe I'll get more letters. I don't know. But for me, the way that I approach it in my classroom is I don't lead with my identity necessarily all the time, because I will tell an inappropriate and irreverent story at some point, and I will critique something that I think we can all probably agree on a critiquing. I will make a comment that they might not expect me to make in my classroom. And then they'll find out that I'm gay. And if you already like me, it's a lot harder to hate me. So I sometimes will try to engage with that which is something that is fueled by areas of my privilege. I just want to very much state that. You can't see most of my areas of diversity. You can't see my neurodivergence. You can't see these different spaces for me. But I try to then use that to my advantage. And then once people have trusted me, then I can have conversations that they might not otherwise trust. And I think that's a privilege we can use in this space. I know of several individuals, some of whom are in this room, who look like old farmers. And when you look like an old farmer, you can talk to old farmers differently than I can talk to them with my purple hair and shaved head and too many rings and funky earrings or whatever. So that's another space where we can use our privilege and use our positioning in various communities to try to make those differences in all the spaces where we're in, because we know that racism is a set of structures that even if we removed all racists from positions of power now, the racism would continue because that's how the structures are built. We know sexism is a series of structures that if you removed all sexists, the sexism would continue because of how the structures are built. Until we remove the structures, we cannot create an equitable space. So we need to all be in all of these spaces and doing the work in those spaces, even if the first thing isn't, Leo, you said at the beginning, well, I'm not a member of the gay community, so I don't know if I'm supposed to be here or not. I didn't even read the application wrong. I don't know. But Leo, when you're in those spaces, you're bringing that stuff to those spaces, and we're raising the boats in all those ways. So I think that's our responsibility to act and do what we can.
On almost the flip side, right? So kind of just acknowledging the lack of privilege. Showing up in those spaces with a lack of privilege, for me, looks like creating cognitive dissonance. So existing in a space that makes people question everything that they previously thought. Like how I will never forget when I came to SMSU as a freshman. I came on a scholarship. And I ran in, this is casual conversation with a peer, no big deal, right? Came having a casual conversation, and we were talking about like how we ended up here, because I'm not from Minnesota, like why did you pick SMSU, that kind of stuff. As I look straight at students and I get the nod, like for real. And I said, oh, I'm on scholarship. And they're like, oh, what sport do you play? I'm on an academic scholarship. But just how quickly they just assumed that I'd have to be here on an athletic scholarship. Like, no, got a 33 on my ACT. I don't know what to tell you. That's how I ended up here. And so I didn't have to say, that was you being biased. But just that casual conversation was enough to spark a, why did I think she was on athletic scholarship. And so existing in spaces that constantly make people question the ideas that they previously had. Oh, she's Afro-Indigenous. Why did I never even consider that? I just assumed that she's just black, right? Or, oh, she said she's autistic. I didn't think that you could be neurodivergent and actually like be successful in life, right? There's all these preconceived ideas that we have about in different labels, and sometimes just existing in the space, it challenges people to change how they think about things. And just that one nugget of cognitive dissonance has been enough. Going back to when I was a bar restaurant manager, I had a gentleman who was like a regular. I used to see him literally once a week. And he moved away. And his last day in town, he came up to me and he said, Joyce, you have done more for my anti-racism than anyone else has. And he was probably like in his 70s. And we didn't have any sort of like big high level conversations. I just did my job, hung out, chatted about life with him, served him food, you know, just talked. But he said, there's so many ideas that I had about who you should be, and you just break them. And you would just break them in casual conversation. It's like, I play rugby, mind blown. Didn't even consider that that's a possibility, right? You know, so just showing up in spaces when it's safe to be authentic, because there's a realism where it's not always safe for people to show up in a space authentically. But to show up in a space sometimes is enough to create that nugget of questioning in people's thought patterns and break that cycle of bias.
Okay, so here we are, last thing. I want to end, so at Transforming Families, we always end our parent support meetings on a moment of hope or joy, because sometimes what we discuss can be heavy. This work can get tiring, right? And so what I want to know from our panel is, what is it that's giving you hope right now? Or if there's a moment of joy you can share with us that comes from this work.
My joy in this work comes from community, which is really the theme of today. And this is going to be a shameless plug as well as joy, so please forgive me. This Saturday, February 3rd, in the lower conference center, so right below us, there's going to be a drag show. And this is the 4th drag show that's happened in Marshall, Minnesota over the course of the last 2 years. The first drag show that we had in Marshall, we put the time into it. We got some great connections. We worked with Brow Brothers, shout out to them. And as the drag show started, and as people were cheering, and we looked around the room, and we saw the faces, and we saw people existing in safety, I started to cry, which, if you know me, that is a very rare occurrence for me. But I was so overcome with the way that Marshall shows out and shows up in spaces where they're created. So my joy comes from the community of events like this, events like the drag shows, events like Pride, events like Juneteenth, like Welcome Week, and the work that community members put into that. But even the act of showing up and being in those spaces, it fuels my spirit and makes me feel like this is a place where I get to belong and where I get to thrive as a person. Leah doesn't want to go next.
I guess I have like radical hope, like just unfaltering radical hope that will not be ever extinguished, because I think of all of our existences here is on the backs of our ancestors. You know, I think of how societally we've locked away people with mental illnesses and disabilities, and yet we're still here. How we've systematically tried to get rid of all Indigenous people, and yet we're still here. How systemically we've tried to undermine the voices of women and female-identified people, and yet we're still here. How, you know, just we could do this forever. We could continue just naming marginalized populations, and yet we're still here. And so that brings me hope and joy, because it means that future generations to come will continue to do this work, no matter what narratives exist and how exhausting it is to hear hateful things being spewed amongst social media or wherever you're unfortunately encountering those things. This has continued since the beginning of time, and we will continue to do this work to make sure that we're creating spaces. And just seeing an entire room after a lunch hour when people are tired, full to the point where we have to pull out extra chairs for folks of people who are all in community, varying ages, varying levels of buy-in, but we all agree on this one thing. We want a community that is safe for all. That just fuels my radical hope.
Oh, I guess for me, it's about my children. My children have gone through some pretty rough times at their school. A lot of racism, just a lot of terrible things happening. But I was able to take my son to the DFL state convention, and he got to see that whole process. My daughter's got to meet Keith Ellison multiple times, so now she's looking at potentially going to law school and becoming a lawyer. Just being able to move into different spaces, through the different things I get involved with that have exposed my kids to people like Anita Gall in the back, who was running for state rep at one time. But having them get to meet people like that, people that are sitting in positions of power as two Native American kids growing up in a rural community, gives me a sense of hope, sense of pride that eventually they're gonna be able to sit in those seats of power and they're gonna be able to help make changes. Because the way things are right now, it's not the best, but it's getting better. Are we done?
Yeah, that's a great answer. And so on that note, that's kind of the end of our time. I really appreciate everyone for being here. I don't know if we want to turn it back over to you, Sue, or... Oh, you've got it, Julie. There you go.
Yeah, I'll actually be doing a closing for today. So I want to thank everybody for being here today. You didn't have to take 2 hours out of your afternoon to come to sunny SMSU to sit in a chair very close to someone else that you maybe didn't know, maybe did know, in chairs that are a lot less comfortable than ours. I do have to be truthful about that. You didn't have to choose to be here today, and yet you did. And I appreciate your commitment to community, your commitment to choose to be here. Because I don't see anybody out here in this space that's like, oh, I wish I didn't have to be here. When is it done? There was active choice. There was an act of love. There was an act of community to be in this space together, to attempt to have better words, more words, some words, whatever it might be. There wasn't a choice that you made, and we get to keep making that choice moving forward. So on behalf of all of the organizers of this, and unlike Sue, I was not organized enough to write those down. So please take a look at the different pamphlets that you've seen around and reach out to those organizations if you want to continue working with them. The More Network has amazing work that they've been doing in the community for years. Find these spaces where you can be involved moving forward. And it doesn't mean you have to do it every single day, but find the ways that we can build connections with other people. Find the ways that we can make our community, this community, right here, a more welcoming place for every single person. We're so grateful that you can be here. And if you'd like to continue the conversation, we're going to have a follow-up conversation where we're actually going to engage in some more of this work. That's on a TBD that's to be determined for those who don't speak acronym. Higher ed, we speak all acronym. You can have an entire conversation and not say an actual word. It's all acronyms. We'll have another announcement. You can keep track of the PFLAG page on Facebook. Check out Marshall Area Peace Seekers. They also will be putting that out there. We'll put it out on the listserv as well for the Marshall Area Peace Seekers. And if you're not on that, there's a sign up on the table over there. Just know that you are not the only one who wants to have Marshall be a welcome and warm and engaging person. There are so many of us out here. And when we connect together, we have the power to change the world. So thank you for being here, and have a great rest of your day.